In the autumn of 1889, a railway construction crew penetrated deep into the remote high country, laying steel through territory that felt increasingly hostile with each passing mile. The work was meant to be straightforward: blast through rock, sink the ties, hammer the rails, sleep beneath the stars. Yet as they approached a narrow gorge cutting through the landscape, something fundamental shifted. The earth itself seemed to reject their presence. Local inhabitants had issued stern warnings: never respond to a voice calling from the darkness. On their first night near the ravine, a voice echoed through the camp, and every man who heard it understood instinctively that it belonged to no living soul in their company. So, before we continue, please make sure to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. During the summer months of 1889, I found myself at 22 years of age and sufficiently impoverished that I accepted any employment offering lodging and 3 square meals daily. This desperate circumstance led me to join a railway construction crew pushing track through the desolate high country stretching between the Mises and the Pine Hills. The railway line belonged to a substantial company headquartered in Denver, and our encampment occupied a shallow valley where scrub grass struggled to grow in sparse, yellowed patches across the hardscrabble earth. The atmosphere remained perpetually arid, and dust infiltrated absolutely everything: our clothing, our food, our bedding, even our lungs. Each dawn, the ground retained the bitter cold of night, yet by noon the sun blazed mercilessly upon the back of one's neck, leaving skin blistered and raw. The wind swept through our canvas tents without the slightest impediment, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant pine. Most days, the sole sounds penetrating the vast emptiness were the rhythmic clank of metal tools striking stone, the sharp bark of orders from our foreman, and the occasional far-off calls of animals we never glimpsed despite our weeks in their territory. Our crew numbered 20 souls on that particular stretch of track. The majority were men who had drifted from one temporary position to the next following the devastation of the war between the states, or after personal calamities had stripped them of better prospects. Our foreman, a fellow named Briggs, possessed a broad, imposing frame, a voice harsh as grinding stone, and a countenance that never displayed the slightest warmth or sympathy. His concerns extended solely to maintaining the construction schedule and advancing the railway. Beyond that singular focus, a man could drink himself senseless throughout the night for all Briggs cared, provided he presented himself when the morning whistle sounded and performed his assigned labor without complaint. My bunkmate was called Eli, a slender chap with exceptionally careful hands who had previously worked telegraph lines before circumstances brought him to railway construction. He maintained a reserved demeanor during daylight hours, but became more conversational after darkness fell, and I noticed he habitually watched the periphery of our encampment rather than staring into the fire as most men did. Another member of our crew was Morgan, a large, boisterous fellow who laughed frequently and delighted in testing his considerable strength against any man foolish enough to accept his challenges. Then there was Tomas, who worked the railway spikes with steady, metronomic rhythm and spoke minimal English, though his comprehension exceeded what he permitted others to observe. At the edge of our encampment stood another tent, smaller than the rest and positioned somewhat apart from the main cluster. An older gentleman named Jonas occupied that solitary dwelling. He had been engaged as both guide and scout, possessing knowledge of the territory that the company deemed valuable. His hair showed gray at the temples, and his eyes perpetually scanned our surroundings with an alertness that never diminished. He knew the trails, the dry creek beds, and could predict weather changes before any visible signs appeared in the sky. The other workers mentioned that he had spent considerable years trapping and trading with the indigenous peoples who inhabited the territories further south. Jonas never confirmed these stories directly, but he listened intently whenever the locals spoke, and that attention suggested intimate familiarity with their concerns. We had been dispatched to carve a path through a stretch of land the company designated as Section 12. On the surveyor's maps, it appeared as merely a series of lines, angles, and topographical markings, standing upon the actual ground. However, it revealed itself as a landscape of jagged ridges, deep canyons, and silent slopes where our noise and commotion seemed to dissipate almost immediately, swallowed by the vast emptiness surrounding us. We advanced incrementally each day, clearing rock with explosive charges and hand tools, sinking wooden ties into the prepared bed, and laying the steel rails with precision. The labor left one's back perpetually sore and one's hands split and bleeding despite the thick calluses we all developed. But I remained young and foolishly believed the physical suffering meant I was earning my rightful place amongst these hardened men. The initial weeks progressed in an established rhythm. We rose before dawn, swallowed bitter coffee and tin beans, marched out to the rail line, swung hammers and pickaxes until the fading light made continued work dangerous, then returned to camp to eat again. Some men engaged in card games until late hours. Others collapsed onto their bunks, barely able to remove their boots, exhausted beyond conversation. At night, our fire created a modest circle of illumination, and beyond that fragile boundary, the ground and distant hills vanished completely into impenetrable darkness. The first indication that our days would not continue in simple routine arrived with a group of local men who appeared near sunset one particular evening. 3 of them arrived on horseback, wrapped in worn blankets despite the dry heat that still radiated from a sun-baked earth. Their faces bore deep lines and serious expressions. They halted just beyond our camp's perimeter and waited without calling out or making their presence known through any greeting. Briggs stepped forward to address them, folding his muscular arms across his chest and demanding to know their business. They did not respond immediately. Instead, the eldest amongst them looked past Briggs, surveying our entire encampment, the line of tents and scattered tools, the equipment crates and water barrels, and finally his gaze traveled upward toward the hills where our rails would soon cut through. His eyes lingered particularly upon the rocky ridge rising to the east, and I noticed his expression darken perceptibly. Jonas emerged from his tent and approached Briggs, then spoke to the visitors in their native tongue. Their shoulders relaxed slightly upon hearing him, and they engaged in extended conversation conducted in low, measured voices. The remainder of our crew gradually drifted closer, pretending disinterest whilst listening intently. Morgan muttered that they likely sought payment for crossing their lands. Another worker speculated they were tracking game. None of our suppositions proved accurate. After considerable discussion, Jonas turned back to Briggs wearing a peculiarly tense expression. He explained that the men originated from a settlement beyond the hills. They had observed the railway line we were constructing and had traveled here specifically to warn us about crossing a ravine that lay ahead. Their concern had nothing to do with land rights or hunting territories. It concerned something else entirely, something that moved through that particular location after darkness fell. Briggs snorted dismissively and declared that the company possessed proper right-of-way and no geographical feature would impede our progress. Jonas did not argue, but maintained his focused attention upon the older rider. The man spoke again, his voice low and steady, his eyes never wavering from Jonas's face. Jonas listened carefully, then provided translation. The visitors claimed certain places existed where the boundary separating our world from something else grew dangerously thin, where particular entities walked that were never meant to be perceived by human eyes. The ravine ahead represented precisely such a location. The men refused to provide a name we could easily pronounce. When Jonas attempted to explain the concept in our language, he spoke with unusual slowness and obvious difficulty finding appropriate words. He told us it had once been a person who violated a grave promise and had consequently transformed into something else, something that wore shapes belonging to no natural creature and sustained itself upon fear and blood. It possessed the ability to replicate the sound of a human voice, but could never reproduce the essence that distinguished a living soul. Most of our crew shifted uncomfortably or averted their eyes upon hearing this explanation. Several men laughed nervously, the sound hollow and unconvincing. Morgan declared loudly that he harbored no fear whatsoever of ghost stories. Briggs grew visibly impatient and instructed Jonas to inform our visitors that we would exercise appropriate caution whilst continuing our assigned work. The old rider listened to this response, and his jaw tightened noticeably. He looked past us once more toward the distant ridge, and his eyes held a profound, weary concern that spoke of terrible knowledge. Before departing, the elderly man spoke final words, which Jonas translated with evident reluctance. If we absolutely must cross that ravine, we should never, under any circumstances, respond to a voice we heard in the darkness unless we could clearly see the speaker. We should never follow footprints that belong to no man in our encampment. And if someone returned from the shadows, appearing wrong in ways we could not adequately explain, we must remember that not everything wearing a man's body remained genuinely human. After the riders turned their horses and departed, our camp filled with restless conversation. Some men scoffed openly and dismissed it as primitive superstition. Others maintained silence and continued watching the ridge as the last illumination drained from the sky. I pretended indifference, but the old man's eyes lingered in my memory as I lay upon my bunk that evening. His warning remained fixed in my thoughts, and I found myself returning to it repeatedly, unable to dismiss it despite my rational mind's protestations. The following morning, when the whistle signaled work's commencement and we marched towards Section 12, I discovered myself counting the men in our line more frequently than usual. I attempted to convince myself this represented merely habit, yet every time I completed a count, I immediately checked again, compelled by instinct I could not adequately explain. The landscape transformed as we progressed toward the stretch the riders had specifically warned against. The scrub vegetation thinned considerably and eventually disappeared almost entirely, whilst the soil gradually assumed a peculiar dull gray color. The atmosphere felt noticeably heavier, though the sky remained cloudless and the wind maintained its usual pattern. Conversation along our working line diminished markedly. Hammers continued to rise and fall in their necessary rhythm, but the calls between different crews grew shorter and less frequent. By midday, we reached a shallow depression in the ground. It ran perpendicular to our intended path and narrowed into a considerably deeper fissure extending eastward. Jonas walked ahead of the main group, hands positioned on his hips, studying the terrain's configuration with obvious concern. Briggs joined him at the forward position. They stood together for an extended period, both staring toward the darker notch that marked the ravine's deepest section. "We can bridge the majority of this easily enough," Briggs announced when we caught up to their position. "That deeper section will require more substantial effort, but nothing we haven't managed previously." Jonas did not respond immediately. His gaze followed the split in the earth where shadows already gathered despite the afternoon sun. He requested a full day to walk the rim thoroughly before we established definite plans. Briggs swore colorfully, then reluctantly agreed, acknowledging that a broken leg would cost considerably more than a single day's delay. We established a temporary work camp near the edge of the shallow cut. The tents were erected with practiced efficiency. Our cook excavated a fire pit, and men hauled provision crates from wagons. Even Morgan's usual boisterous energy seemed subdued. Periodically, someone would glance toward the dark line marking the ravine's position, then quickly drop their eyes as though afraid of what might be observing them in return. Near sunset, Jonas collected a lantern and rifle and informed Briggs he intended to circle the ravine's perimeter for reconnaissance. Briggs instructed him firmly to return before full darkness descended. Jonas nodded acknowledgement and set off alone, his steps steady and purposeful despite the treacherous terrain. Following our evening meal, most of us congregated around the fire. The aroma of beans and coffee hung thick in the still air. Eli sat near me, shoulders hunched forward, turning a tin mug repeatedly in his hands. His eyes kept sliding toward the edge of our illuminated circle, seeking something in the darkness beyond. "You heard what those men said," he murmured quietly, "about that thing that wears people." I nodded. Every man in camp had heard the warning, and none had forgotten it despite their daytime bravado. "I used to run telegraph lines through country thick with similar stories," he continued. In the end, there was always a rational explanation, a man or an animal, never anything supernatural. Still, this particular place feels fundamentally wrong. Morgan overheard him and snorted derisively. Every patch of dirt possesses a frightening tale. Common folk require something to blame when circumstances turn unfortunate. Tomas sat upon a crate with his plate balanced in his lap, methodically watching our circle. His eyes moved from face to face, then toward the surrounding shadows, carefully matching each voice to its corresponding body. I had begun doing precisely the same, though I had not consciously decided to do so. The night cooled rapidly once the sun disappeared below the horizon. The stars emerged sharp and brilliant overhead. Our fire's glow appeared considerably smaller than it had at previous encampments. Conversation thinned progressively. Men drifted away to their tents until only a handful of us remained beside the dying flames. Briggs checked his pocket watch and frowned deeply. Jonas had not returned. He stood decisively, collected a spare lantern, and instructed 3 men to accompany him. Eli stepped forward immediately. Briggs pointed at me and Morgan, and we fell in behind without hesitation. We departed camp and walked toward the ravine's suspected location. Our lantern light shook with each step, throwing distorted, moving shapes across the uneven ground. The sounds of camp faded rapidly behind us. The ground dipped noticeably, and loose stones shifted treacherously beneath our boots. We heard the ravine before reaching it. A faint rushing sound rose from below where a thin thread of water moved across stone deep within the earth. The air near the edge felt noticeably cooler. Briggs raised his hand, and we halted immediately. "Jonas," he called, his voice carrying along the rim before dropping into the cut. No answer emerged from the darkness. We proceeded along the edge, maintaining prudent distance from the precipitous drop. Our lanterns cast weak, inadequate light upon the opposite wall where pale stone rose in an irregular line. In some locations, the rock protruded outward. In others, it fell away into deeper shadow that our lights could not penetrate. After considerable time, Eli pointed ahead. "There," he said quietly. Ahead, near the edge, the ground showed obvious disturbance. A set of boot prints crossed the dust and gravel. One sole displayed uneven wear at the heel. Jonas walked with a characteristic slight turn of his foot. I recognized that same distinctive angle in the marks before us. The prints led toward a narrow outcrop that projected over the ravine. We followed them cautiously. The tracks terminated at the outcrop's edge. Beyond it, the rock dropped away vertically. When I stepped closer and raised my lantern, I discerned a narrow ledge below, barely wide enough for a man to traverse sideways. Fresh scuff marks on the stone showed where boots had recently passed. Briggs swore vehemently. Bloody fool climbed down. Eli stared into the impenetrable darkness. Why would he do that alone? No one ventured an answer. We listened intently. The slow trickle of water echoed faintly from the depths. Occasionally, a small stone shifted as the ground settled. Nothing else. Briggs raised his voice considerably. "Jonas, answer if you hear me." For a moment, only the sound from below continued. Then a voice rose from the ravine. "I hear you," it called. It was Jonas's voice. The words emerged clearly, but something fundamental about them felt profoundly wrong. The tone approximated his usual manner, almost precisely, yet it fell flat in ways I had never heard from him. The pauses landed in incorrect places. The breath behind the words did not match the exertion required for the climb he would have made. Briggs did not notice these subtle wrongnesses. His shoulders visibly relaxed. "Where are you?" he shouted. "Are you injured?" "Down here," the voice answered. "Follow the ledge. It's perfectly safe." The final sentence caused every thought in my head to crystallize into sharp focus. Jonas would never speak that way. He would have instructed us firmly to remain positioned until he reached us, or until daylight made the descent safer. The words now carried no characteristic caution whatsoever. Eli moved closer to me. "That isn't right," he whispered urgently. My mouth felt completely dry. The old writer's warning about voices in the darkness returned with full, terrible clarity. My rational mind desperately sought a simple explanation for the strange sound, but nothing fit the circumstances. Briggs stepped toward the edge. "We're coming down," he called. I grabbed his arm forcefully. "Wait," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to control it. "We cannot see him." Briggs turned on me sharply. "You want to abandon him down there? He would never call us along a ledge in complete darkness," I said firmly. "He's exceptionally careful. You know that about him." Morgan shifted uncomfortably, caught between us and the precipitous drop. Eli stood perfectly still, jaw tight with tension. The air near the ravine felt progressively colder. Our lantern light seemed incapable of reaching far. Again, the voice rose from below. "Hurry," it said. "It isn't safe to wait here." The words themselves were appropriate, but contained absolutely no fear or urgency in their delivery, only steady, emotionless pressure. I could not adequately explain the wrongness, but I trusted that instinctive recognition more than the familiar sound of that voice. Briggs pulled his arm free and leaned over the edge, raising his lantern high. The light fell across the upper section of the ravine wall, but revealed nothing below the ledge. The angle proved too steep. The darkness swallowed our beam almost immediately. "We don't abandon a man out here," Briggs said firmly. "He wouldn't abandon us." Eli stepped closer, voice low and urgent. "Something's fundamentally wrong. Listen to it again." Briggs opened his mouth to respond when the voice rose once more from the ravine. "Come down," it said flatly. "I've injured my leg." The words were spaced without any authentic feeling whatsoever. Jonas always spoke in a rough, steady tone, but this carried no strain of pain or discomfort. If he had genuinely hurt himself, his breath would have caught. His voice would have wavered with suffering. Instead, it dropped each word without emotional weight. I heard a small scraping sound on the rock below. It was soft and quick, as if something had adjusted its footing. Morgan tightened his grip on his lantern noticeably. Briggs hesitated. His jaw moved as he thought, eyes fixed on the gap before us. The moment stretched unbearably. The quiet pressed in from all sides. Then he stepped back decisively. "Fine," he said. "We hold position until first light. If he's stuck down there, we'll extract him when we can see properly." A breath left my chest that I had not realized I was holding. Eli nodded once, visibly relieved but still tense. Morgan exhaled loud enough for all to hear. We turned to head back toward camp when another sound drifted up from the ravine. It was faint initially, then grew distinctly clearer. Footsteps. They were light, uneven, and close to the wall, as if someone climbed upward. Each step landed with a quick scrape against stone. Then, after several beats, the sound stopped abruptly. Briggs turned sharply. His lantern swung back toward the ledge. "Jonas," he called again. Silence followed. We stood completely still. The night air settled into a cold that crept through my coat and reached my skin. Eli stepped near me and whispered, "There's nothing down there." Morgan squinted into the ravine. "Perhaps he's making his way up," he suggested, but even he did not sound convinced. We waited another prolonged moment. Nothing moved. No voice answered. No additional footsteps scraped the stone. The ravine returned to quiet except for the soft trickle of water deeper below. Briggs motioned for us to follow and kept the group tightly together during our return walk. No one spoke. Our lanterns bobbed through the darkness, their glow appearing fragile and inadequate against the vast emptiness surrounding us. When we reached the outer tents, most of the men remained awake. Our search had unsettled them considerably. They watched us approach, faces tense with unspoken questions. Briggs informed them that Jonas had descended into the ravine and we would wait until daylight to mount a proper rescue operation. Some men muttered concerned responses. Others looked toward the ravine's direction with visible dread. The fire still burned low, but no one sat around it. Even its warmth felt thin and inadequate. The night pressed in at the edges of our camp. I glanced at the shadows between the tents and felt the same profound unease from the ledge. Eli pulled me aside urgently. "That wasn't him," he whispered. "You know it wasn't." I rubbed my hands together and nodded. I know. He swallowed hard. If something else is out there, we shouldn't be outside alone tonight. We won't be, I assured him. Stay close to me. Briggs walked the camp's perimeter to check our defensive position. When he passed near us, I asked, "Do you think he's badly hurt?" He kept his eyes ahead. "We'll know in the morning." I could tell he wasn't certain of anything. We retired to our bunks soon after, though few slept easily. I lay on my bunk, listening to the wind brushing the tent walls. Every sound made me alert. Now and then I thought I heard slow steps outside, but whenever I held my breath to listen more carefully, nothing followed. At some point, I drifted into light sleep. The darkness inside the tent broke when a faint glow came through the canvas fabric. I thought dawn had arrived early, but the light wasn't warm. It flickered slightly, like lantern flame. I pushed myself up and listened intently. Outside, a single voice called out. "Briggs," it said. The tone froze me completely. It sounded like Jonas, but in the same flat, emotionless way as before. No urgency, no fatigue, only a steady, controlled sound that carried through the cold air. I reached over and shook Eli awake. He stirred, confused until the voice came again. "Briggs." Eli stiffened instantly. "That isn't him." Another voice rose from a nearby tent. Someone else had heard it. A lantern snapped open. Then another. A pair of boots struck the ground. Briggs stepped out of his tent holding a lantern. The flame shook slightly in his hand. He looked around the camp, scanning for the source. The voice came for a third time. "Briggs, come here." It sounded close now. Not from the ravine, not from the darkness behind the fire pit. Instead, it came from somewhere between the tents. Men froze where they stood. No one answered. Briggs raised his lantern and edged forward cautiously. I stepped out of my tent with Eli beside me. The air felt noticeably colder than before. My breath hung visibly in front of me. Morgan emerged holding a shovel like a weapon. Briggs halted near the row of supply crates. "Jonas," he called out. "Where are you?" The silence that followed stretched painfully. The lantern showed nothing but tents, crates, and dusty ground. Then a figure stepped into the edge of the light. At first glance, I thought it was Jonas. The height approximated his. The stance appeared similar. But when the figure moved closer, every part of me locked with instinctive dread. The arms hung too low. The shoulders were too narrow. The head tilted in a way no person would naturally hold it. The face was almost right, almost. But every feature was slightly stretched, as if pulled into place without understanding how a human face should actually look. The eyes caught the lantern light. They reflected it in a sharp gleam that no human eye naturally produced. Eli whispered, "That's not him." The figure stepped forward again, movements stiff and jerky. Its boots did not strike the ground the way Jonas's had. Each step landed with a slight drag. "Briggs," it said. The voice was Jonas's voice, but the sound contained no life whatsoever. It was like hearing a memory repeat itself without the man behind it. Briggs stepped back. Men behind him scrambled away. The figure stopped at the edge of the closest lantern glow. It shifted its weight in a slow, uneven motion, its eyes fixed on us with no sign of recognition. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my legs stayed rooted. Then the thing opened its mouth again. "Come here," it said. Briggs raised his lantern higher, as if more light would force the figure to resolve into something he recognized. It didn't. The face stayed wrong. The posture stayed wrong. The eyes stayed fixed on him without blinking. Morgan stepped forward, shovel gripped tight. "What in hell is that?" he whispered. Eli pulled me back slightly, his breath tight in his throat. Around us, men formed a loose circle, keeping distance from the thing in the light. No one dared move closer. The figure took another step. Its shoulders shifted in a slow, disjointed motion, each movement delayed from the next. It lifted one arm as if reaching toward Briggs. The sleeve hung off it strangely, as if the limb beneath wasn't the right shape for the fabric. Then the thing spoke again. "It's safe." The words fell flat, exactly the way they had by the ravine. Briggs's face twisted. He finally saw it the way we did. He stepped back fast, nearly stumbling over a crate. "Stay where you are," he ordered, voice shaking despite his attempt to sound steady. The creature stopped. Its arm hovered midair, then dropped back to its side with a stiff, unnatural motion. It cocked its head, studying us. For a moment, the entire camp went silent. Even the wind seemed to wait. Then, the creature's body twitched violently. Its legs bent in a way that made several men gasp audibly. It dropped to a lower crouch, limbs displaced at angles no human joints could form cleanly. Its head tilted further, the neck bending as if it had no skeletal structure. It shot forward toward the closest tent, skittering across the ground with short, rapid steps. The lantern light caught its limbs properly for the first time and showed the terrible thinness of them. Skin pale and stretched, pulled tight over shapes that didn't match human bone structure. Shouts broke out. One man dropped his lantern. Another ran toward the fire pit. Morgan lunged forward, swinging the shovel with all his considerable strength. It missed as the creature darted behind a tent, moving far faster than before. Briggs yelled for everyone to hold position. No one listened. Men scattered between tents, lanterns jerking wildly. Every shadow looked like a place where the creature might break out again. I grabbed Eli's sleeve. "Stay close," I said, forcing my voice steady. He nodded, eyes fixed on the shapes around us. A scream cut through the noise. It came from near the supply crates. A man stumbled backward into the open, clutching his shoulder. Blood ran between his fingers. Behind him, the creature crawled out on all fours, limbs too long, back arched, its head facing forward whilst the rest of its body twisted in a conflicting direction, as if it had too many motions to choose from simultaneously. It rose again to stand. The stolen shape of its face stretched into something resembling a grin, but not quite. Briggs raised his lantern and shouted, "Back away from it!" The creature stepped toward the wounded man. Morgan charged again, roaring as he swung the shovel with tremendous force. This time, he caught the creature across its left arm. The limb jerked, but didn't break. The creature reeled for only a second before turning sharply toward Morgan. It tilted its head again. Then, in that same wrong voice, it said, "Help me." Morgan froze. The words hit like a trick folded in Jonas's familiar tone. The creature took the moment and lunged. It slammed into him with enough force to knock him down. Morgan's lantern cracked against a rock, the flames sputtering out. The darkness in that corner of the camp deepened instantly. Men shouted in chaos. Briggs yelled for weapons. Tomas ran toward the wagons where tools were stored. Several men tried to get between Morgan and the creature. I hesitated only a moment before pulling Eli with me toward Morgan. We forced our way past the tent and reached the clearing. The creature crouched over Morgan, its body blocking the light, moving with rapid, jerking motions. Morgan's boots kicked desperately, his voice breaking in a panicked cry. Eli grabbed a rock near the fire pit and hurled it. It struck the creature across the back. The creature snapped its head toward us, eyes gleaming as the lantern light caught them again. It paused just long enough for Tomas to arrive with a pickaxe. Tomas swung downward. The metal edge struck the creature's shoulder and bit into the pale skin. A sharp, unnatural sound came from it. Not a scream, not a growl. Something between the two, cut short. The creature recoiled and sprang backward faster than our eyes could fully track. It landed near the shadow between two tents and vanished inside it. Several men ran after it, but Briggs shouted for them to stop. "No one splits up," he barked. "Form a line." Morgan groaned and pushed himself up. Blood ran from his forearm where the creature had grabbed him. His breaths came fast. His eyes darted around camp, searching for movement. Eli knelt at his side. "Are you alive?" "Feels like fire on my arm," Morgan muttered. It tried to pull me. I felt the bones shift. I examined his wound. The skin was torn in long, narrow streaks. Not claw marks, not teeth. Almost like the pressure of long, thin fingers forced into his flesh. Briggs strode through the group. "We can't stay here tonight," he said. "Everyone, arm yourselves with whatever you've got. Keep lanterns lit. We stay together." He scanned the camp quickly. "Count off." Men shouted numbers. I listened, heart pounding. 19. There had been 20 before Jonas went missing. "He's still out here," I said quietly. Briggs already knew. Eli looked at me. "It's still out here too." I nodded, throat tight. "And it's watching." We formed a defensive circle around the fire. Lanterns were brought in hastily. More wood was thrown on the flames until they climbed higher than before. The shadows pushed back, but only slightly. Everything beyond our illuminated circle felt alive with menace. We maintained a rough circle, weapons raised. A few men tried to calm their breathing. Others muttered prayers. No one sat down. As the minutes stretched, the night seemed to wait with us. The wind no longer moved through camp. Even the flames bent upward without flickering sideways. Then from somewhere near the outer tents, we heard the quiet sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, very close. The footsteps stopped just outside the reach of our lanterns. Every man in the circle tightened their grip on whatever they held. I scanned the dark gap between two tents, trying to match the sound to a shape, but nothing moved visibly. "Stay sharp," Briggs muttered, barely above a whisper. The steps resumed. This time they circled us at a steady pace, moving around the edge of the camp with clear intention. Not rushing, not hiding, as if the creature was choosing when to enter the light. Eli leaned toward me. "It's waiting for someone to break." A man on the far side of the circle shifted backward a step. Briggs snapped at him. "Hold the line." The man froze, then nodded. His hands trembled visibly. The footsteps stopped again. Then a voice called out from the darkness. It was Jonas's voice. "Let me in." The voice sounded closer than before, almost at the edge of the firelight, but the tone stayed fundamentally wrong. Every pause landed at the wrong moment. Every word held the same flat pressure we had heard earlier. The man who had stepped back earlier whispered, "It knows his voice too well." Eli's jaw tightened. "It's copying what it hears." The voice came again. "Let me in, please." This time, the word please dropped without tension or breath, as if the creature had learned the shape of the word, but not the intent behind it. Briggs closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. When he opened them, his voice was firm. "You're not him. Show yourself or get away from this camp." The night went silent. Then a faint clicking sound echoed near the supply crates. It was sharp and quick, like joints snapping into place. Lanterns were raised in that direction. Nothing showed in the light. Without warning, a shape rushed toward the line. We barely registered it before men swung their tools instinctively. It darted back before anyone landed a hit. Another rush followed from the opposite side. Again, it retreated before reaching us, testing the edges of the circle, searching for a weakness. The men grew increasingly restless. Every time it moved, lanterns shook and shadows jumped. The creature stayed just outside reach. It was learning how we reacted. Morgan's arm shook with pain. He pressed a rag to the wound, but the bleeding had slowed. What frightened me more was the look on his face. He kept staring into the dark, as if the creature might call his name next. Then we heard it imitate someone else. "Help me," it said, this time in Morgan's voice. The sound cut through every man. It was perfect in tone, but empty of feeling. Morgan's head jerked toward the darkness, his breathing accelerating. "That's my voice," he whispered. The creature stepped closer. A dim outline moved behind one of the tents. The head shape was wrong again, tilted too far, bent as if the neck had no limit. It stood still enough that the lanterns finally caught the white of the eyes. Briggs raised his arm. "Hold!" No one moves. A moment passed. Then the creature's posture shifted. It leaned forward, and the pale gleam of its eyes brightened noticeably. The voice rose again, this time twice in a row in Morgan's exact tone. "Help me! Help me!" The repetition sounded like mimicry practiced with no understanding of timing. The second one overlapped the first as if it didn't understand cadence. Briggs gave the order before it finished. "Form tight. Don't let it slip between us." Men shuffled inward. The fire blazed higher. The camp's light thinned the shadows slightly, but the creature stayed just beyond where we could strike effectively. Then something happened that none of us expected. We heard another voice from the darkness. "Get away from them." It was Jonas's real voice, not the flat imitation, not the halting tone. His real voice carried force, breath, and strain. It came from deeper in the darkness, farther from the creature's position. Every man froze. Even the creature seemed to hesitate. Briggs stepped forward a few inches. "Jonas? Is that you?" No answer came at first. Then a sound followed. Boots scuffing the ground, slower and weaker than the creature's frantic movement. "Briggs," Jonas called again, breathing hard. "I'm here." Lanterns swung in every direction. Men shifted, trying to catch a glimpse of him. The fire crackled and spat sparks. Then, a figure limped into the light. It was Jonas, the real Jonas. His face was exhausted, streaked with dirt, eyes sunken but alert. His coat was torn, his left leg dragged behind him as if injured from a fall. When he reached the edge of the firelight, he shielded his eyes from the brightness. Morgan exhaled, relieved. Tomas lowered his pickaxe slightly. But before anyone moved toward Jonas, he raised a trembling hand. "Don't come closer," he said. Briggs frowned. "Are you hurt?" "Yes," Jonas said, keeping his distance. "Fell. Took me a long time to climb out." I believed him. His voice carried the roughness and breath that the imitation had never captured. His shoulders rose and fell with exhaustion. His movements were genuine and strained. But Jonas didn't look at Briggs or any of us next. He looked past us toward the outer tents. "It's not gone," he said. "If follow me up." Briggs turned sharply. The men closest to the edge backed up fast, pulling lanterns toward the clearing. Something moved behind one tent. The canvas bowed inward. A whisper of sound followed. Eli whispered it was watching him. Jonas swallowed. "It wanted me to lead it to you." As his words settled, we saw the shadow shift again. This time, it didn't retreat. It stepped in a clearer view. No disguise now. Its limbs were long, bent, and thin. Its torso stretched into a narrow frame that barely looked human. The face was stripped of the false mimicry. It was pale, hollow, and wrong. The mouth pulled too wide, the eyes dark with reflected light. The creature lowered itself into a crouch. Then it made a sound that did not resemble speech. A short, sharp burst of breath, and it charged. Briggs shouted, "Hold the line." The circle tightened. Men braced themselves. The creature hit us like thrown weight. It slammed into the nearest man, knocking him backward into the fire pit. Sparks exploded upward. The creature sprang away before the flames reached it, darting toward the gap between Tomas and another worker. I swung a hammer at it as it passed. The head of the hammer struck its arm. The impact felt solid, but the creature hardly reacted. It twisted and grabbed the man beside Tomas, yanking him toward the shadows. Briggs lunged forward with a crowbar, hooking it around the creature's shoulder. The creature jerked away, dragging both Briggs and the screaming worker several steps before finally releasing them. Lanterns fell, light scattered across the ground. The creature stood a few paces away, breathing fast, chest rising in sharp movements. Its eyes darted between each of us, not frightened, measuring. Eli whispered, "It's thinking." "Stay together," Briggs said. "We end this now." The creature straightened. Its body lengthened unnaturally. Then it stepped backward into the darkness between the tents. We raised lanterns and tools, waiting. It didn't flee. It waited too, and I realized something deeply unsettling. It wanted us to break formation. It wanted us alone again. Briggs must have sensed the same thing I did because he didn't let anyone pursue it. He kept his arms out, steadying the men closest to him. "No one leaves the line," he said. "It's trying to pull us apart." Jonas limped closer, keeping to the firelight. His face was tense. It doesn't fight unless it sees weakness. It waits for confusion. "We're not giving it that," Briggs said firmly. The circle tightened again, though several men still looked toward the dark gap where the creature had disappeared. The fire crackled and sent a short wave of heat across us. Beyond it, the night felt colder than before. Jonas's voice came quiet but clear. "It won't leave. It thinks one of you will fall behind sooner or later." Morgan breathed heavily and wiped sweat from his forehead with his uninjured arm. "We can't stand like this all night." "We have to," Briggs replied, "until daylight, or until it shows itself in the open." The silence pressed down again. Boots shifted on the dirt. Lantern flames shook from the trembling hands that held them. The creature didn't move. It didn't step into the light. It only lingered where we couldn't see the details. Then we heard another sound. Breathing. Not human breathing. It came in short, staggered bursts, each one too forceful and too shallow. It circled us from the direction opposite where it had disappeared. Its pace was slow, deliberate again. A man behind me muttered a prayer under his breath. Another wiped his mouth nervously. Eli leaned close. It's learning how we react. Every second we give it, it learns more. Instinct told me the same. The creature wasn't mindless. It didn't attack wildly. It tested, waited, and copied. Briggs pointed toward the fire. We need more light. Get every piece of wood on it. He looked at Morgan. You stay in the center. Tomas and two others ran quickly to grab planks and broken crates. They fed the fire until flames rose higher and spread more light across the ground. The shadows shrank a little, but the creature stayed just outside them. When the breathing stopped, the quiet felt worse. Jonas's eyes scanned the darkness. It's choosing a direction. Then we watched every side. Briggs said firmly. We held the circle for several long minutes. My legs ached. My arms burned from gripping the hammer so tightly. Eli shifted his weight, but didn't step away. Nothing moved. No voice came. The silence dragged until each man started doubting his own hearing. Then a voice finally broke it. A voice we hadn't heard before. Help! It was thin and uneven, like a stranger's voice trying to copy a sound it didn't understand. It didn't belong to Jonas or Morgan. It didn't belong to any man in our camp. It sounded younger, higher, almost like a child calling from a distant tent. No children in this crew, Morgan muttered. That alone chilled every man. Briggs raised his lantern. You don't listen to that, he said. None of you move. The voice came again. Help! I'm stuck. The words hit the camp with a weight that was worse than any mimicry we'd heard before. It didn't match anyone. It didn't try to. It felt like the creature was trying new sounds, learning new patterns. Tomas swallowed, muscles tense. It's trying different voices, seeing which one makes someone break. I couldn't shake the thought that if even one man moved toward that sound, the creature would be on him instantly. Jonas limped closer to us. Don't speak to it. Don't answer. Just hold. The creature, wherever it was now, went silent again. Men adjusted their stance. Some gripped their tools higher. Others stared into the darkness, trying to catch the faintest outline. Then something large moved near the outermost tents. We heard the canvas of a tent shift, then snap, as if something heavy brushed it. Briggs swung his lantern. The light reached the tent for only a moment before something darted past the opening. Not running, climbing. It crawled up the back of the tent in a flash. The canvas sagged under its weight, showing the long stretch of its limbs pushing outward. Men shouted, scrambled backward, nearly breaking formation, but Briggs barked for them to stay put. The tent buckled further. Then the creature shifted again. The outline of its head pressed against the canvas at an unnatural angle. Its eyes made two faint points of reflected light through the fabric. Eli muttered, It's above us. Keep the circle, Briggs warned. It won't jump without a reason. The creature crawled along the ridge pole of the tent, shifting its weight from side to side. Each movement strained the canvas until the seams stretched dangerously. It stopped at the peak. Jonas pointed. It's watching for an opening. Briggs nodded. Then don't give it one. After a long pause, the creature moved again. This time it crawled downward on the far side of the tent and vanished from view. Every man breathed out at once. Then the tent collapsed. The ridge pole snapped and the canvas folded inward as if crushed by something inside. The sound of tearing cloth filled the camp. Men scattered backward, even though Briggs shouted to hold. I took a step back myself without meaning to. Eli steadied me with a hand to my shoulder. We can't go near that, he said. The tent flattened, still shifting slightly, as if something moved underneath the canvas. Morgan called out, It's trying to confuse us. Keep tight. Then the movement inside stopped completely. No breathing, no shifting, nothing. Lanterns shook as men lifted them higher, expecting the creature to burst from the canvas. But it didn't. Instead, something smoother happened. A pale hand pushed up through the top of the collapsed tent. The fingers were long and thin. They spread slowly, testing the air. The creature rose through the torn fabric, shoulder first, head turning last. Its face emerged into view at the top of the pile, pale and empty, eyes catching the lantern glow with that same cold reflection. Then it stood, full height, out in the open. Every man stumbled backward. Briggs braced himself. Jonas gripped a broken branch like a spear. I pulled Eli behind me instinctively. The creature took a step toward us, a single quiet step, then another. It wasn't testing us anymore. It had decided to fight in full. Briggs shouted, "Hold!" The creature lunged. It moved faster than before. Its limbs hit the ground in quick bursts that were hard to track. It swung its arm and knocked a lantern from a man's hand. The flame burst across the dirt, lighting a streak of dry grass. Jonas shouted, "Don't scatter!" But the creature was already in the center of us. Men swung picks, hammers, and boards. Some strikes connected, but the creature's body absorbed them like glancing blows. It snarled without sound. It grabbed Tomas by the collar and hurled him into two men behind him, breaking the circle. That was the opening it wanted. It surged toward the break. Briggs charged in from the side, slamming the crowbar into its ribs. The creature twisted and struck him across the face, knocking him to the ground. Eli yelled my name as the creature turned, its eyes locked on me. For the first time, I felt the full force of its focus. Its head tilted, its limbs folded inward, preparing to spring. I raised my hammer, but I knew I wouldn't stop it alone. Before it leapt, Jonas shouted, "Look at me!" The creature froze, head snapping toward Jonas. Jonas stood at the fire pit, holding a burning length of wood from the edge of the flames. His voice was raw. "You want me, not them." The creature dropped to all fours and lunged at him. Jonas held his ground until the last possible moment. The burning length of wood trembled in his grip, but he didn't step back. The creature leapt with its limbs spread wide. Its body stretched into a shape that looked built only for violence. At the final instant, Jonas swung the burning wood upward. The flames met the creature's face and chest with a burst of light. The creature recoiled midair, twisting violently before landing off balance on its side. A harsh, broken sound came out of it. A sound with no pitch, no pain, only raw reaction. Jonas staggered from the force of the swing. The firelight shook around him. The creature scrambled up faster than anything should have been able to, limbs bending out and then snapping back in as it regained its stance. "Keep hitting it," Briggs shouted, still on the ground, but pushing himself upright. The nearest men surged forward. Tomas, bruised but conscious, dragged himself to his feet and raised his pickaxe. Another man brought down a hammer toward the creature's back. The creature darted away from the blows with sudden jerks, its movements less coordinated now, as if the fire had disrupted whatever calm control it had relied on. It rushed toward the edge of the camp again, trying to find another gap. But the men had closed ranks faster than before. This time they stood shoulder to shoulder, lanterns high, weapons drawn. Eli gripped my arm. "Don't let it slip through us again." Before I could answer, the creature changed directions. It dashed straight toward the fire pit, toward Jonas. Jonas didn't retreat. He raised the burning wood again, drawing on what strength he had left. His injured leg buckled under him, but he refused to fall. His breath came short and sharp. The creature did something we hadn't seen yet. It stopped before reaching him. Not from caution, from recognition. It leaned forward slightly, body rigid, staring at Jonas, as if measuring not the fire, but the man holding it. Its chest rose and fell once, slow and deliberate. The firelight reflected off its pale skin in long streaks. Jonas stared back. His voice came out low. "You follow me because I crossed your ground." The creature tilted its head, slow and exact. Jonas adjusted his stance. "You followed me because I lived when you expected me to die down there." His words weren't challenge or taunt. They were realization. The air around us tightened. Even the fire's crackling felt smaller. Then Jonas said something that stopped every man cold. "You want to finish what you started?" The creature lunged, but Jonas had anticipated it. He sidestepped and brought the burning wood down with all the force he could muster. It struck the creature across the neck and shoulder. A harsh cracking sound echoed through camp. The creature shrieked. Not a scream, but a forced exhale that stripped the air from our lungs. Its body writhed, limbs flailing in short bursts. It staggered away from Jonas, its posture collapsing into something uneven and unstable. "Now!" Briggs shouted. "Hit it whilst it's down." The men closest to it surged forward. Hammer struck its back. A spade slammed into its ribs. Someone swung a length of rail tie and caught it across the side of its head. For the first time, the creature struggled to stay upright. I moved in beside Tomas and brought my hammer down on its shoulder. The impact jarred my arms all the way to my spine. The creature dropped to one knee. It tried to rise again. Jonas hobbled forward, grabbed a second length of burning wood from the fire, and thrust it toward the creature's face. The creature recoiled sharply, its limbs scraping the dirt. "It hates the fire," he said. "Keep the flames close." Men gathered every burning scrap from the edges of the pit and moved in. The circle tightened again, not to defend, but to trap. The creature twisted, desperate now. Its movements were losing rhythm, losing control. It swiped at the burning wood, but every time it got near the flames, its body jerked back violently. Morgan stepped forward despite his injury. He held a lantern in his good hand and swung it forward. The creature hissed as the warm light touched its face, stumbling backward into a half-collapsed tent. Tomas rushed in and slammed the pickaxe down. The creature rolled away, skin scraping against canvas and dirt. It tried to stand again, limbs shaking. Jonas pointed toward the fire pit. "Drive it in." Briggs understood at once. "Push it." We moved as a single group for the first time all night. Burning wood, lanterns, and tools forced the creature backward. It clawed at the ground, dragging itself away from the heat. Every man shouted, fear, determination, fury, all of it mixing into one loud wave. The creature twisted with sudden strength, nearly breaking through the line. But Jonas stepped into its path and thrust the burning wood under its jaw. The creature reacted like it had been struck with boiling water. It shrieked again, its limbs spasming. Its body twisted sideways, losing all coordination. Tomas and Morgan pushed from behind. I struck its side again. Men with lanterns closed in, forcing the creature toward the fire pit until its heel slipped into the outer ring of embers. It panicked. For the first time, we saw panic in it. It thrashed, limbs jerking wildly. It tried to climb over the men, but they struck it back each time. The creature's lower leg landed in the edge of the fire pit, skin blistering instantly. Jonas shouted, "Hold it there!" We pushed harder. The creature's body writhed against our strikes, but it could no longer decide on a direction to flee. Its limbs clattered against stone and dirt. It writhed like something caught between forms. Briggs stepped in with a rail tie raised high. "End it now." He swung down with everything he had. The blow landed on the creature's skull. It collapsed instantly. Its limbs sprawled outward, twitching once, then going still. Silence fell over the camp. The only sound left was the fire crackling and the ragged breaths of 20 exhausted men. I backed up a step, sweat dripping down my face, hands shaking from the force of what we'd done. Eli let out a long breath and leaned his hands on his knees. Morgan wiped blood from his arm and stared at the creature's still body. "Is it dead?" Jonas limped forward and lowered one of the burning pieces of wood toward the creature's face. The flames lit the hollow eye sockets and the stretched, unnatural shape of its features. The creature did not move. Jonas waited. It still did not react. He nodded once. "Yes." Tomas exhaled sharply and sat down in the dirt. Someone else sank to their knees. Briggs dropped the rail tie and braced his hands on his thighs. Nobody cheered. Nobody spoke. For a while, we only stood there, waiting for something to stir again. Nothing did. At last, Briggs looked around the camp. "Guard it until morning," he said. "No one goes near it alone." He looked at Jonas. "And you sit down before you fall over." Jonas gave a tired half-smile and lowered himself to a crate near the fire. His leg trembled from the effort. Eli came to stand beside me. "We lived," he whispered. I nodded. "We did," but I could not look away from the creature's still body. Even dead, it looked like something the world had not meant to hold. And we had no choice but to face whatever morning would bring, that we kept every lantern lit until dawn. No one slept. Men rotated in pairs to stand closest to the creature's body, keeping a length of burning wood or a lantern within arm's reach. No one trusted it enough to look away. Even dead, it felt wrong to leave it unguarded. Jonas stayed near the fire, legs stretched out, breathing unevenly. Now and then he looked toward the corpse with a distant, wary expression, as if expecting it to move again. Briggs wrapped a torn coat around Jonas's injured leg and told him not to try standing until the sun was high. Jonas didn't argue. The rest of us repaired the worst of the camp's damage. The collapsed tent was set aside. The crates knocked over in the fight were collected and res-tacked. Most of the work was conducted quietly. Men glanced over their shoulders every few minutes, checking the shadows, even though the creature lay motionless in the open. Morgan sat with his back against a wagon wheel, his injured arm wrapped in strips of clean cloth. His eyes held a tired intensity. Every time someone walked near him, he looked up quickly, only relaxing once he recognized the person. Eli stood beside me, rubbing his hands together despite the heat from the fire. His voice stayed low. "We need daylight. I want to see the land properly. See if anything else moved through here. We'll leave as soon as the sun rises," I told him. "That thing followed Jonas for a reason," he said. "It wasn't random. He didn't expand. I didn't ask him to. The truth was obvious. Something in that ravine wasn't meant for people to cross. Something had watched Jonas climb out, and it didn't want him reaching us alive." A pale line eventually appeared on the horizon. The first morning light crept across the ridge, pushing the shadows back slowly. Men straightened as the sky shifted. A few sighed silently in relief. When the sun finally rose high enough to light the camp fully, Briggs gathered us together. "We burn it," he announced. "Far from here." Jonas shook his head. "Don't bury it. Burn it. Nothing else will keep it down." Briggs paused. None of us questioned Jonas after surviving the night. Briggs nodded. "Then we burn it." We prepared a pyre from broken crates, dry brush, and anything that would catch flame. Men worked quickly and without hesitation. No one wanted the body in camp any longer than absolutely necessary. When the pyre was ready, four men approached the creature. None volunteered, but they didn't refuse either. They wrapped the corpse in what was left of the ruined tent canvas, keeping as much distance as possible. Even dead, the limbs felt unnatural under the fabric, too long and too light, as if the bones inside weren't the right shape. The men lifted the bundled corpse and carried it to the pyre with slow, measured steps. Jonas watched every movement carefully. Morgan muttered, "Don't let it touch the ground again." The men sat on top of the stacked wood, stepping back quickly once it was in place. Jonas nodded toward Briggs. "Light it." Briggs handed him a burning branch. Jonas leaned forward, bracing on his good leg, and pressed the flame to the dry wood under the canvas. The fire caught at once. Flames spread across the pyre in a growing wave. The canvas shrank and blackened in the heat. The creature's shape curled under the fire, limbs drawing inward, but it didn't move. No sound escaped it. The flame swallowed its outline until only dark, charred folds remained. We watched in silence. No one spoke until the pyre sank under its own embers. Briggs turned to the men. "We're leaving this place today. Pack everything." No one objected. By mid-morning, the camp was broken down. The men worked with a quiet urgency. Even the toughest amongst us kept glancing toward the ridge and the ravine as if expecting something else to climb out. We moved the wagons and supplies back along the track we'd laid. It wasn't fast progress. Jonas's leg slowed us, and Morgan needed help lifting anything heavy, but no one complained. Being farther from the ravine mattered more than schedule. By afternoon, we put several miles between us and the place where the creature had died. The air grew lighter, and the sun warmed the ground differently. Still, the men kept close. No one walked alone. Even the usual chatter didn't return. Briggs called for a halt near a stand of pines. "We camp here tonight," he announced. "No fires after dark. Lanterns only." Men nodded. There was no argument. We set up a smaller, tighter camp. Jonas rested against a tree with his injured leg propped on a bedroll. Eli tended to him and checked the wound carefully. Jonas winced but stayed still. Morgan sat nearby. "You think any others are out there?" he asked Jonas. Jonas didn't look up. "I think that thing was alone. But the land out here has old places. Some are safe, some aren't. We crossed one that wasn't." Morgan shuddered. "Glad it's dead." Jonas hesitated, then said, "Most people don't kill one. Most never see one long enough to try." That quieted the group. As the sun lowered, the camp settled. Men kept their lanterns ready. I walked the perimeter with Eli. The pines swayed above us, their branches shifting with a dry rustle. The wind felt familiar again, no heavy weight behind it. Still, we kept watch until the last light faded. Hours passed. Nothing moved. Nothing called out. Nothing circled the tents. Near midnight, I sat with Eli at the edge of camp. The cold crept in again, but this time it was the normal kind, not the hollow chill from the ravine. "You think it's really over?" Eli asked. "Yeah," I said. "I think it ended back there." He nodded silently. We stayed awake until another pair relieved us. The night remained uneventful. When morning broke, brighter and cleaner than the day before, even Briggs let out a long exhale. We continued east, away from Section 12 and everything in it. No man in the crew ever rode back near that ravine. Not even Jonas once he healed. The company later reassigned the route. Officials chalked it up to unstable ground and poor terrain. None of them asked for more detail. None of us offered any. A year later, Eli and I parted ways when the line split north. Tomas went home to his family. Morgan left for a telegraph job farther west. Jonas retired from guiding altogether. Briggs took another crew and never spoke of that night again. I stayed on the rails a few more seasons, met new crews, saw new land, but something changed in me after Section 12. I learned to listen for things other men ignored, to watch the dark edges before stepping through them, to trust instincts that came without proof. I never forgot the sound of its voice, or how it tried to wear the shape of a man, or how silence feels when something in the night is choosing who it wants. Sometimes, when the light fades just right and the wind dies for a moment, I remember those footsteps circling us in the darkness. And every time, I feel the same reminder settle in my chest. Some warnings are not superstition. Some places are not meant to be crossed. And some things die only because the night allows it. The railway eventually pushed through that territory using a different route, one that curved miles around the ravine we'd encountered. I heard later that surveyors had reported strange sounds and refused to camp near certain locations. The company never questioned their judgment. After all, lost time costs money, but lost men cost far more. I returned to that region only once, many years later, when age had slowed my step and gray had touched my temples. I didn't go near the ravine itself. I'm not a fool, but I spoke with some of the local people, the ones whose ancestors had warned us. They told me their stories had been passed down for generations. The thing in the ravine had many names in their language, none of which translated well into English. It had been a person once, they said, who committed a terrible betrayal and was cursed to wander between worlds, never fully alive, never fully dead, sustained only by the fear and flesh of those who crossed its territory. They said it returned every few decades when someone disturbed its resting place or violated the boundaries their people had long respected. And they said that killing it didn't destroy it. Not truly. It would return eventually, perhaps in a different form, perhaps in the same ravine, or perhaps somewhere else where the boundary between worlds grew thin. I asked them how many people had died there over the years. The old woman I spoke with simply shook her head. "Too many," she said. "Always too many who don't listen." I thanked her and left, carrying her words with me. Now, in my final years, I write this account not as entertainment, but as warning. The world is larger and stranger than we permit ourselves to believe. There are places where old rules still apply, where old things still walk, where the boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond grows dangerously thin. If you find yourself in such a place, if the locals warn you away, if the land itself feels wrong in ways you cannot articulate, listen. Trust your instincts. Some knowledge is earned through terrible experience, and some prices are too high to pay for mere curiosity or stubbornness. I survived Section 12 because Jonas knew to trust the warnings, because Briggs finally listened when it mattered, because 20 men stood together when every instinct screamed to scatter. We were fortunate. We were prepared in our own crude way. We had fire and steel, and daylight eventually came. So I leave this account for whoever might need it. If you hear a voice in the darkness that sounds almost right but feels fundamentally wrong, don't answer. If someone returns from the shadows but seems changed in ways you cannot name, don't trust them. If the land itself warns you away, listen. And if you must cross such a place, never go alone. Keep fire close and pray that dawn comes quickly. Some things are meant to remain in darkness. Some places are meant to be left alone. And some boundaries exist not to be challenged, but to be respected. I learned that lesson in the summer of 1889 in a remote stretch of high country where we tried to lay railway track through land that did not want us there. I was young then and poor and thought myself brave. I am old now and no wealthier, but I know the difference between bravery and foolishness. The scar on my hand where I gripped the hammer too tightly still aches when storms approach. Morgan's letters stopped coming after 10 years. Eli wrote until his death, always signing off with "Remember Section 12." I remember. I could never forget. Sometimes, late at night when sleep eludes me, I wonder if that creature truly died, or if it simply returned to wherever it came from, waiting for the next fool to cross its territory. I wonder how many others have encountered such things and survived to speak of it, and how many more never survive at all. But mostly, I remember standing in that circle of firelight, surrounded by 19 other frightened men, facing something that wore the shape of humanity like an ill-fitting coat. I remember the sound of its voice, the wrongness of its movements, the cold intelligence in its eyes. And I remember Jonas, injured and exhausted, standing between it and us with nothing but burning wood and desperate courage. We lived because we stood together. We lived because we had fire. We lived because dawn finally came. Not everyone is so fortunate. So heed this warning, reader, whoever you are, whenever you read this. The world contains wonders beyond imagination, but also contains horrors beyond comprehension. Respect both. Fear both. And when the darkness calls to you in a voice you almost recognize, remember us. Remember Section 12. And don't answer. Some invitations should never be accepted. Some voices should never be answered. And some places should never be crossed, no matter what riches or glory might wait on the other side. That is the lesson I learned in 1889, and it is the lesson I leave for you now, written in my failing hand, hoping that someone, somewhere will read these words and make a wiser choice than we nearly made. The railway prospered. The company made its fortune. The land was conquered, or so we told ourselves. But I know better. I know that some places can never truly be conquered, only survived. And I know that out there, in the remote corners of the world, in the places where civilization fears to tread, old things still walk, old boundaries still hold, and old warnings still carry the weight of terrible truth. Listen to them. Respect them. Live. That is all I can offer you now. That, and the hope that you never find yourself standing in the darkness, hearing your name called in a voice that is almost right, but fundamentally wrong, wondering whether to answer. Don't answer. Never answer. Run. This account was written by James Whitmore, formerly of the Denver Railway Company's construction crews, in the autumn of 1924. He passed away 3 months after completing this manuscript, which was discovered among his effects by his daughter, who chose to preserve it as a record of her father's experiences and as a warning to future generations.